let's talk about drugs and alcohol in prison, because for crimes committed, between 65 and 85% are believed to be related to drugs and alcohol. So somebody is either under the influence or committing a crime to get money for drugs, or it's crime related to the drug trade. So if we look at that, we have a central core of our criminal issue is drugs and alcohol. So you would think, of course, the number one priority is to keep drugs and alcohol out of prisons. That isn't the case. So when I was in the jail, what I saw was it was a much more secure facility, and you had a little bit of weed coming in, you had tobacco coming in, you had guys making wine, because prison wine, or wine that you make in a box, or wine that you make in a trash bag, or whatever container, is a really easy thing to do, and it's really hard to stop. All it takes is fruit or something that has yeast and sugar, and something on commissary or something on the tray is always going to have sugar, so it's going to be kind of a cyclical problem. Like, people have been making wine for years, it's not going to stop. The drug part is another issue, though. Because in the jail, like I said, there was a little bit of weed or there was a little bit of tobacco, but it wasn't an overwhelming problem because there was a really tight security and they paid the jail staff fairly well. And there was this understanding that we need to keep this out because it's going to make things better for us. Once I got to prison, it was wide open. I'm talking about, like, you could buy weed, you can buy heroin, you can buy cocaine, you can buy whatever. You want a needle to shoot up, you can buy that too. So what I saw was people that had issues with addiction or issues with alcoholism go commit crimes, get arrested, and be put in a place where they could just continue that behavior. There was no period of recovery, there was no period of abstinence, there was no work on the self. So I think the first goal is to take away the access to drugs and alcohol. Like, that would probably help. But then the second thing is to do the work, because if you take away the drugs and alcohol, but you don't do anything to address, the needs or the underlying issues, well, then when somebody has access again, they're going to fall back on old behaviors. So when it was me trying to figure out how I was going to live my life and what I was going to do, I had that 2 steps forward, 1 step back kind of thing. Like, after going to prison behind cocaine and the insanity, I never touched cocaine again. But I didn't stop using, I didn't stop drinking immediately. I would stop for a little while and start again and stop and start again because I was lost. And I remember I didn't shoot heroin until I went to prison. Like, I'm in prison and I'm feeling this hopeless place. I've got this 32-year sentence. And this guy's like, yo, bro, you got to try this. Like, it'll change your life. And it did. I remember the first time he shot me up and it hit me and I just fell down in the chair, and it was just like the most overwhelming thing in the world because I felt numb. I felt none of the pain and none of the anxiety and none of the hopelessness. I just felt numb. And for a few years, that was what I did. When I just became so overwhelmed that I didn't know how to cope and I didn't know where to go, I just go do some dope and I would feel numb. I wouldn't feel the pain and I wouldn't feel the anxiety. And I realize now how unhealthy of a coping mechanism that was. But at the time, I didn't see an alternative. I didn't know what else to do, because one of the reasons I had so many troubles with addiction, with alcohol, with the issues that I was facing, is because I had no coping tools. I didn't have skills. I didn't know what to do. I didn't know how to be okay even when I was uncomfortable. I thought, if I'm uncomfortable, something is wrong and I have to change this. I have to go fuck something, I have to go get high, I have to go run, I have to go do something to change the way that I'm feeling, and that's not a healthy attitude. So learning that distress tolerance, learning to sit with discomfort was a huge thing. And then learning emotional regulation, like, how can I deal with my emotions? How can I be less vulnerable? How can I be stronger? How can I be, kind of more detached from this emotion and realize that it's not necessarily true? Like, feelings aren't facts, but I didn't understand that. And I thought every time I felt something, it meant I was worthless, or I was angry and I had to do something, or I had to lash out. And I didn't understand that because nobody taught me. So one of the things that I really pushed when I was a mentor in the mental health pod was getting people the therapy and the basic things they need. So we taught DBT, which had all of those components. I did a class on accountability, which was both about asking people to take responsibility for what got them into prison, because that was never done except for at the Victim Impact Program, which was a pilot program. So one time in 19 years, I was asked to take responsibility for why I was in prison. Like, shouldn't that be the central focus? Shouldn't we be talking about that? But the other element of the accountability class was looking at the influences people had in their lives, because nobody grows up in a vacuum. Nobody grows up and decides to commit a robbery in a vacuum. Nobody grows up and decides to, assault somebody in a vacuum. It's an experience that's learned. It's an experience that's learned through desperation or through being a victim yourself or through the kind of behavior and culture that you're in. So recognizing that is about liberating a person, about being accountable for their actions in the past, but giving them choice and option in their actions in the future. Basically giving people an understanding that they have a sense of agency. They can make different decisions now that they have an understanding, and they can break free from those old patterns and those old habits. But it's hard because those are strong. Like, almost everybody I know has a habit. If you go into a room, you end up sitting in the same seat every time. If you go into, a restaurant, you like your booth, or you like your bar stool, or you like your whatever, because we're creatures of habit. So those ineffective or unhealthy habits are just as hard to break as the good ones. So what we have to do is start making small, positive, good habits. And when you have ready access to drugs and alcohol, and you don't have ready access to treatment, you don't have ready access to therapy, it's kind of a problem, because it's a lot easier to get to the dope man than it is to get to the therapist. It's a lot easier to get to the guy making wine than it is to get somebody who can help you with your problems. And that was one of the reasons that I realized the structure isn't there, but I have the time to find the structure. I have the time to find the people that can help me with the things that I need. So I reached out to prisoners, and I had mentors that changed my life, and I had mentors on the outside. I had people who helped me find a different direction, and I tried to make it as holistic as possible because I kept thinking it was a silver bullet thing, like, well, all I have to do is quit drinking, or all I have to do is quit doing dope, or all I have to do is quit doing this. Then it was, oh, well, all I have to do is meditate, or all I have to do is read this, or and then I realized it's every area of my life, mental, physical, spiritual. I need to deal with all of these things, and I need to have tools and skill sets in all these areas. And that was really helpful because as I watched later on, having been that person who didn't know how to deal with discomfort, every time I saw somebody getting anxious and angsty and going and doing something destructive or going and spending money they didn't have, which created a whole set of problems, I recognized that used to be me. And as we say, like there, but for the grace of God go I. So rather than judging this person or looking down on them, I understand, like, I have been that person. I have the potential to be that person if I don't stay on top of my game. And that's why meditation and daily practice and the things that I do are so important because they are how I became the person that I am. And if I don't keep doing them, well, I'm not going to be the person that I am. I'm not necessarily going to be the person that I want to be. So it's really tempting sometimes when good things come along and we get busy and we're like, oh, I don't really have time to meditate, or I don't really need to talk to my Zen teacher, I don't really need to do this. And then we stop doing the things that got us there, and all of a sudden we're back in the place where we started. Or even if not as much, like we're back in a place of being miserable, or back in a place of being uncomfortable. So anyway, the drug thing always bothered me because you had an issue with staff bringing it in, you had an issue with being thrown over the fences, you had an issue with coming in through visits, you had an issue with drones, but the only thing that was ever looked at was the visits. So like we had our visits continually restricted. So at first they were like, okay, well, we used to go in our blues, like basically jeans and a shirt. You go in there looking like a normal person once you've worked your way down to a level 3 or below. So it's like, I've done the work, I've stayed out of trouble to get down to this level, and now I get to have visits with my family that are like normal, and I'm dressed like a normal person. And they're like, no, we're gonna do that. Like there used to be food in the vending machine. You could buy sandwiches or little pizzas. It was amazing. If you get that visit once a month or once every 6 months or whenever it is, not only do you get to see your family, you get to do something with them. You get to eat with them. You get to enjoy with them. But they took all that away and they only left like candy bars or something I guess you couldn't hide drugs in. Like I don't understand how you're gonna hide drugs in a sandwich, but you can't hide it in a candy bar, but that's their life. And then they did the clothes thing. So instead of wearing our blues, we had to wear these backwards giant jumpsuits, these like potato sack jumpsuits that were zipped up in the pack. That actually, I hate to tell you, made it easier for guys to smuggle drugs in. Like it didn't help make it harder, it made it easier. But the whole thing didn't make any sense because it was like, we're punishing this. Okay, we're saying we're gonna restrict this from visit, but we still had significant overdoses during COVID when there were no visits. So clearly visitation is not the only or even the main issue or the main source of drugs. So what are we doing to address this? Nothing. We're continuing to restrict visitation. We're saying that people can't get mail from the street anymore because it could have drugs in it, or it could have drugs on top, or drugs in the stamp. But we're not addressing this because we still have drugs in prison. We still have overdoses happening regularly. So addressing the issues that obviously aren't the actual issues isn't addressing the fact that we have drugs in prison. And again, at the very basis level, by not providing consistent and important and focused treatment, we're not giving people the tools and the skills they need to succeed and get sober. So then they're going to be what? Just taking nutmeg out of the kitchen because that's what they do desperately because they can't get drugs? So if you can stop the drugs from coming in, you're just going to have more guys making wine. You're going to have guys doing kind of desperate things. Because again, we need to get to the core. We need to help people heal whatever is going on that drives them to that place of compulsion, that place of addiction. And I believe that's the focus. Like, that's the point. Whether you go to a 12-step program, or you go to a therapy program, or you go to a cessation program, you go to a harm reduction program, the goal is to address what's going on the inside that's leading to that behavior. So the drug thing always bothered me because the way they responded to it, and then it was the kind of desperation and the money and the everything, because the dope man is taking advantage of everybody else's desperation. And I get that. Like, that's his business model. That's what he was doing on the street. That's what he's doing in there. But again, as long as we continue to kind of allow that, well, what we have is we have people that are continuing their criminal behavior. And here's my thing. I don't want people to get in trouble, but I don't want to see people keep coming back to prison. I don't want to see people keep creating harm. And this is actually a situation where I think the decriminalization of drugs would help, because then we can disempower the gangs, we can disempower the cartels, we can disempower whatever. And here's a really simple one. Like, Suboxone has become a huge drug in prison because it's so easy to get. People on the street can get it and they can bring it in. And it's supposed to be to stop from using opiates. It's supposed to help somebody stop using drugs, but it's now become the drug replacement. It's so cheap and it's so easy, so people get strung out on it. If you've ever seen somebody come off of that, or come off of Neurontin, or come off of Tramadol, it's not a pleasant thing. I'm talking about like shaking and sweating and like, I feel like this dude's gonna die and I gotta call medical. But that's become the thing because we have people coming in off the street and they're like, yeah, we don't give you anything. You're just gonna be dope sick and you're gonna be miserable and like, good luck. And then we have people in prison and saying, okay, well, if you have a drug problem, I'll give you a really good example. These two guys came to me because they knew that at that point I was in recovery and I was doing things differently. They said, hey, we want to stop. Like, what can we do? I said, well, let's talk. Like, we can do a program thing. They were like, no, we need you to walk with us. We need you to keep us out of the way. And I was like, dude, that's not how it works. Like, I'm not going to be your dad. I'm happy to help you along the way. I'm happy to walk with you, but I can't stop you from doing what you want to do. So then we went to the psych department and we were like, hey, these guys want to stop, but they can't go back to the hole because they can get drugs in the hole. Like, they want to go somewhere where they can get help. Like, can we have a pod where it's just people who are trying to get clean? Or can we have a pod where people are doing this? Or can they get sent to a facility? Because they knew that stuff was going to kill them. And they were like, yeah, sorry, we really can't do that. We found one psych guy who wanted to help, so we looked at starting a program that was based around recovery. The problem was, it ended up being something about mental health. It ended up being about medical issues and people at risk of predation. That's what they ended up funding because they didn't want to fund a substance abuse program, I guess, for whatever reason. But again, until that's provided, until that's the focus, until that's what we're doing to give people the tools they need to succeed, we're going to continue to have people getting high in prison. We're going to continue to have people drinking in prison. We're going to continue to have people engaging in that same behavior that led them to prison in the first place. But again, if we can get to that core, if we can have psychologists and social workers and occupational therapists and people there to help people change their patterns and change their behaviors and change their thinking, well, then maybe we can get somewhere. But as long as it's just lock them up and like we're going to try half-heartedly to stop the drugs from getting in, you're not really changing anything. And you're not giving people a sense of hope and you're not giving people a new path. And some people, thank God, have the strength or the ability or the connections to change on their own, but they're not changing because of the system, they're changing in spite of it. And until we make it a system about empowering people and giving them better tools and better alternatives, we're going to continue to have these high recidivism rates. We're going to continue to have people overdosing in prison, getting out and overdosing on the street, that sense of hopelessness and learned hopelessness that is so endemic in prison. I just want to see things done better, and I believe that we can do things better, but it hadn't happened yet.